Good day, everyone. We're going to tackle now the conformity and obedience by in the subject social psychology. Again, conformity and obedience. Um, Number one, define differences between conformity, compliance, obedience, and acceptance. Number two is identify classic conformity and obedience studies. Number three is identify and understand the two forms of social influence that explain how people will conform to others. Conformity defined. So, what's conformity? Conformity is defined as a change in behavior or belief as a result of real or imagined group pressure by Mayors 2014. The change of behavior depends on what a person chooses as as a label to correspond with their values and judgment. This is why conformity is at times bad. If you conform to the group of drug addicts, so kung nakasama mo yung mga marites, pwede ka maging marites din kasi pinili mo silang kasama. So, same flock, fly together. Anyway. Okay, at times good. If a place maintains its cleanliness due to the people conformity to others who throw their waste in the proper trash bin. Like for example, when I was in Singapore, napakalinis ng mga tao doon. Kailangan organized, maayos, malinis lahat. Sumusunod ka sa traffic rules, kung tatawid ka, kung naka-red na ang light, hindi ka na pwedeng tumawid. So, nakukuha mo yung kanilang mga gawi. So, uh, it's a meaning of conformity. And at times, unnecessary. If a person wears red during Valentine's Day, okay, yeah, okay. Conformity is not just acting as other people act. It is also being affected by how they act. It is acting or thinking differently from the way you would act and think if you were alone. Thus, conformity is a change in behavior or belief to accord with others. One example here is, like for example, naririto na nga ako sa pinagtatrabaho kong lugar. Hindi kasi natin kultura yung, yung umiinom ng tsaa everyday, ng morning, ng tanghali, tsaka ng gabi. Dito, talagang the whole day yata ako umiinom ng tsaa. So, hindi ako uma-acting lang dahil kasama ko sila o kaharap ko sila, kundi gagaya na rin ako sa kanila. So, what is the varieties on conformity? Compliance. It is insincere outward conformity that follows a set of expectation. Even if you do not agree with that what you're doing, for example, joining a school parade, even if you dislike being part of it. So, sumusunod ka lang para lang matapos na ganun. That's compliance. Obedience. It is also compliant, but with a direct command. Obedience is a form of conformity that follows a set of expectation to get rewarded or avoid punishment. For example, the school requires you to join the school parade because they could gain something from it. So, from the word obedience. Next is acceptance. It is sincere inward conformity wherein you accept expectation and request and believing as well as acting in accord with the group pressure. For example, joining a school parade is required, but you also want to be a part of it. Wow. Harmoniously. Next is conformity studies. So there's a example here. Let me tell you a story. Sheriff's studies of norm formation. Muzaffar Sharif, 1935 to 1937. Pakita lang tayo. Oh, 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 oh. Correct. Now, Muzaffar Sharif, 1935 to and 1937, conducts an experiment on the development of a social norm in a laboratory. His experiments aim to know if the participants would conform to the group even if other participants would give different answers from them. This experiment's procedure uses an illusion called autokinetic phenomenon wherein there will be a pinpoint light shown to the participant in a dark room. For a few seconds, the light would seem to move and will disappear, but it didn't actually move. The participant will be asked to say their estimation on how long the light will be moved. On the second day of the experiment, the participants will be joined by two other participants or the confederates who are said to have the same experience as a real participants. The, um, the procedure from day one repeated, but the confederates' answer are different from the participants' answer. Findings reveal that participants conform to the Confederates and their different answer emerge into one. Sheriff 1969. The participants interpret the situation differently after knowing the views of others. Thus, a group norm was formed and shows that our views of reality are not ours alone. Next is Next is Ash studies of group pressure. Solomon Asch, a social psychologist, is very well known for his experiment to determine how people are affected by how others think and behave. He used a picture of a series of printed line segments of different lengths. He asked the participants to choose a line in the choices that the given line most closely parallels in length. There is only one through subject in the participants, and the remaining member are all confederates who are aware of the experiments. Confederates are used to manipulate the situation wherein they will choose the wrong answer and know if the subject will conform to them. The experiments show that most people tell the truth even when others do not. Bert Hodges and Ann Geyer, 2006. Next is Milgram's obedience experiment. Milgram's 1965 to 1974 experiment seek to determine the obedience of people in spite of their conscience. In this experiment, the setting is said to be Yale University's psychology laboratory. There is one subject wherein he will be assigned as the teacher and a confederate in the room next door who will act as a learner. The task of the teacher is to ask the learner a question about a list of word pairs given to them. But if there will be error, a punishment, delivering a shock of increasingly increasing intensity, which is actually harmless. So there's a punishment would be given to the learner by the teacher. The task of the learner is to give a wrong answer on purpose. There were 30 switches on the shock generator labeled from 15 volts. This is only slightly shock to 450 volts. It's XXX. Every time the teacher switched the shock generator, for every wrong answer, there would be a flash of lights. Relay switches click um, and an electric buzzer sounds. If the answer refused to administer a shock, the experimenter would give a series of prods to ensure that they would continue. Prods like please continue. The experiment requires you to continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice but to continue. Next, the finding of these experiments are two-thirds of participants continue to the highest level of electric shocks. It implies that people tend to obey orders given by the authority even if it is against their conscience. Next, four factors of obedience. Milgram not only revealed that the extent to which people will obey authority, but he was also able to examine the conditions that breed obedience. Below are the four factors determining obedience. Number one, victim's distance. People tend to show their obedience and lessen their compassion if they could not see the victims and if they could not see them. This is why people are more likely to abuse someone who is distant from them. For example, a person who cannot argue with someone is person may be crueler when posting on social media aiming to anonymous people. On the other hand, people are kelanonimisbe if they could see the victim's situations. This is why advertisements for cigarettes have compelling photographs or description of individuals with lung cancers caused by cigarettes. Through these photographs, people will try to smoke would have a second thought about smoking. Number two is the authority, closeness, and legitimacy. Studies reveal that people comply more if the authority is physically close. If the authority commands person through telephones, he will be less likely to obey the authority's command, or he is possible to lie about obeying his command. Moreover, people also tend to comply if the authority is legitimate. Another experiment examines the behavior of hospital nurses, wherein an unknown physician ordered the nurse to inject the patient an obvious drug overdose. Hoffling and others, 1966. Finding shows that majority of nurses did not obey the command of the unknown physicians. One thing is for sure, a doctor is a legitimate authority and nurses obey the doctors. Number three is institutional authority. Authorities who are part of respected institution inhibit social power. The obedience of an individual sometimes depends on the reputation of the authority's institution. This is why we believe more in television news than the news posted by the unknown blogger on the social media. Next is liberating effect of a group influence. People tend to conform due to group influences even if they don't agree with it. But if there would be a person who will defy the command, one who doesn't agree with the command will also disobey in spite of the majority. For example, a leader would ask the group to do something illegal, but there was a member who disobeyed the command. Other members could possibly conform to the member who disobeyed the command. and defied the command. Therefore, this classic study shows that group pressure is very powerful in influencing a person's behavior. In the obedient studies, even if they are in the dilemma of doing good and doing harm, a, a lot of participants choose to obey. Group influence makes the participants comply even if they don't agree or they did not agree, and later on makes them accept and act according to the group. And lastly, the power of the situation is seen when the good participants engage with a terrible situation and tend to do exceptionable acts. Number next next is predicting conformity. The following are the conditions that help predict conformity. Group size. This is the number one. People elicits more conformity if the group size is larger than 1 or 2. A group size of beyond 5. Again, group size. People elicits more conformity if the group size is larger than 1 or 2. A group size of beyond 5 results in diminishing returns. Gerald and others, 1968. Rosenberg, 1961. Moreover, people conform more to small independent groups than one large group because a small independent group's mutual understanding seems to be more credible. Study shows that people tend to conform to the decision of two groups or three than one group of six. David Wilder, 1977. Next is an anonymity. Anonymity. An anonymity. Yes, correct. Number two is anonymity. People tend to do their own belief if someone would do the same with them. Again, anonymity. People tend to do their own belief if someone would do the same with them. It is easier to voice out one's distinct thoughts if at least one person would differ from the majority. Next is cohesion. Cohesiveness is a we feeling in which members of the group are highly attached or bound to the one another or bound to one another. Therefore, the more cohesive the group, the more the member would follow their group members, the more power it gains over its members. One usual example appears in dormitories where people living together could adapt to the behavior of one another. Column and Harten 27. Next is status. An individual tends to conform more to people with higher status and less more likely to obey people who are in a lower status than them. In Milgram's variants of his experiments, a participant who is a welder, a lower status, immediately obeys the experimenter's high status command. On the other hand, another participant who seems to be a school professor, high status, disobeyed the experimenter's low status command. In switching into 150 volts and started questioning the ethics of the experiment. Therefore, higher status people tend to have more impact. Driscoll and Mullen, 1990. Public response, this is the number 4. People usually conform due to public expectation. They think that they need to act according to the majority even if they didn't agree with them. In Ash experiment, the number of conforming participants would lessen if they were asked to write down the answer because there would be no group pressure. Next is prior commitment. Number 5. A person with a prior commitment to a certain behavior is less likely to conform because he will stick to his commitment first. For example, teens who pledge to for virginity till marriage tend again teens who have teens who pledge for virginity till marriage tend to abstain sexually than teens who didn't pledge. This is because the pledge served to be their commitment. So they are more likely to conform to people who are also committed than those who are not, regardless of the size of the group. Behrman and Bruckner, 2001 and 2005. Reason why we conform. Okay, it was Morton Deutsch and Harold Gerard, 1955, who identify the two reasons why people conform. I didn't bring my charger. All right. Number 1, letter A, normative influence. So it's the desire to be liked. This results from an individual who wanted to be liked and accepted by society. They conform because they wanted to go along with a group to be commended or to gain approval. Peer pressure is one great example of normative influence wherein they conform to the group's interest and behavior for them to be a part of them. Moreover, we know that rejection and humiliation are painful. Normative influence leads people to comply more, especially when they have seen other people being humiliated or ridiculed. This is why people tend to conform to avoid rejection and humiliations. Letter B, informational influence. This is the desire to be right. This results from an individual who desires to be right. As an individual observes other people who are eliciting their behavior, he at the same time could gather information from their experience with these people. This information could influence him and conform to their behavior. For example, your friend asks you to go to the particular restaurant. From this scenario, you could gather information about the interests of your friend. Even if you don't care what your friends like, you may adapt to your friend's interest, and this is how informational influence affect the behavior of a person. Next is predictors of conformity. Letter A is personality. Again, predictors of conformity. Number 1, predictors of conformity, letter A is personality. Personality can predict behavior better if social situations are weak. For example, a very shy person join a group of people who are more extroverted and people person. Regardless of his personality, the shy person would sooner or later adapt to the behavior of the group. Personality tests are less likely to be helpful in determining Personality tests are less likely to be helpful in determining conformity because conformity depends on the situation, especially if group pressure is present. Next is culture, letter B. Culture or cultural background helps predict conformity. Study shows that collectivist countries are more likely to respond to others' influence than individualistic countries, by Roy Bond and Peter Smith, 1996. Moreover, cultural differences occur within any country and may change over time. Thus, conformity and obedience is a common circumstances, yet that change across culture and generations. Letter C is social roles. Conformity doesn't always depend on the power of situation, but also on our social roles. Norms take significant aspect in the conformity because of every role. It conforms to a cluster of norms. For example, a person who has a professor role would more likely conform to the cluster of norms like how professors teach, how they discipline students, or how they interact with students. This professor would also play a role as a father wherein he would conform to another cluster of norms. Letter D is role reversal. Reversal usually happen in a pair of relationship, parent and child, doctor and patient, employer and employee, etc. Each person would act accordingly to their roles and restate the other person's role before acting upon their own roles. For example, an employer-employee relationship, wherein the employer restates his employee's role or play a new role as an employee and conforms to the other employees before giving his employees a task so that he would be able to understand the role differ from their own. Next is, should we strive for being different? So this is the factors of anti-conformity. We have this factor number 1, reactance. Sense of freedom and self-efficacy are very significant to every individual. According to the theory of psychological reactance, the people act to protect their sense of freedom. If a person was restricted from their sense of freedom, they might inhibit anti-conformity or the boomerang effect to protect their behavior. Bremen, 1981, and Nail and others, 2000. So this is also reactance. Also, reactance can change one's behavior if other people conform to them. For example, a non-geeky student stopped wearing a Livestrong wristband when a geeky student conforms to them. Berger and Heath, 2008. Next, the factor of anticonformity is asserting uniqueness. There are also people, especially in those individualistic Western culture, who feel uncomfortable when they appear to be similar to others. They have a spontaneous self-concept, wherein they are aware of individual differences. This is why they act in the ways to be different and preserve their uniqueness and individuality. Thus, individuals are less likely to be responsive to the majority influence. Imhoff and Irv, 2009. Social psychologists' emphasis on the power of social pressure must be joined by a complementary emphasis on the power of the person. We are not puppets. When social coercion becomes blatant, people often experience reactance, a motivation to defy the coercion in order to maintain their sense of freedom. We are not comfortable being too different from a group, but neither do we want to appear the same as everyone else. Thus, we act in the ways that preserve our sense of uniqueness and individuality. In a group, we are most conscious of how we differ from others. Mayors 2014. So we have the glossary here. Number one, acceptance, conformity that involves both acting and believing in accord with social pressure. Number two, cohesiveness, a we feeling to the extent to which members of a group are bound together, such as by attraction for one another. Next is conformity, a change in behavior or belief as to the result of real or imagined group pressure. Number four is compliance, conformity that involves publicly acting in accord with an implied or explicit request while privately disagreeing. Number five is normative influence. Conformity is based on a person's desires to fulfill others' expectation, often to gain acceptance. Number six is normative influence. Conformity is based on a person's desire to fulfill others' expectation, often to gain acceptance. Number seven or number eight, informational influence. Conformity occurring when people accept evidence about reality provided by other people. Lastly is the obedience, acting in accord with a direct order or command. Our reference here are the from Mayors G 2012 Social Psychology 11th edition, McGraw-Hill Higher Education, and Mayors G 2014 Exploring Social Psychology 7th edition by McGraw-Hill Higher Education. Yun lamang po ang ating topic mula sa ating Social Psychology, Conformity and Obedience. Maraming salamat po, Sir Agri. Thumbs love. Thank you. Thank you po. Ako po ay magpapaalam na. Nag-record lang po ako para sa aking lesson. Marami pong salamat. Nasaan? Hala. La, la, la. Sir Agri, maraming salamat po. Sana po nakikinig na po kayo. Hindi ko nababasa. Nakatambay na ako. Hindi, magpapaalam na po ako, Sir Agri, magpapaalam na po ako. Pasok na po kayo. Opo, maraming salamat po sa pagpunta sa aking live. Nag-ano na po ako, nag-record lang po ako ng aking lesson. Ako po ay magpapaalam na at ako po ay matutulog na. 12:00 na po ng umaga rito, 12:00, 12:20 ng umaga. Yan, mahirap kasing magtagalog. Kung ano bang magkastila. 12:20 ng madaling araw na po dito. Maraming salamat po. Thank you po. Ako po ay magpapaalam na. This is my lesson, conformity and obedience. Thank you po, Sir Agri. Magandang umaga po diyan sa Pilipinas. Opo, thank you po. Sige po, paalam. God bless you po. Bye!